The night sky has always held a quiet kind of wonder. It stretches endlessly above a canvas of soft darkness, sprinkled with points of light that whisper of faraway suns and distant worlds. For most of us, those stars are simply a backdrop to the rhythm of life, a steady presence that keeps its secrets. On certain nights, though, when the air is still and the earth seems hushed, one can almost feel the sky leaning closer, as if it has something to share. It was in the early years of the 1960s, a decade poised between the calm of post-war life and the restless energy of what was to come. In the small towns and winding roads of New England, life moved with a slower rhythm. Families gathered for dinners, radios hummed with news and music, and people made their way through the ordinary days that seemed steady and familiar. Beneath those routines, the universe carried on, vast and silent. Betty and Barney Hill were a part of that quiet world. They were, in nearly every way, an ordinary American couple. Betty, thoughtful and steady, worked as a social worker. She was practical, warm-hearted, and deeply caring, with a habit of noticing small details others might miss. Barney, her husband, worked for the U.S. Postal Service. He was hard-working and dedicated, carrying a sense of responsibility that showed in his every action. Together, they built a life shaped by the everyday commitments of work, family, and community. The Hills lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, a coastal city where sea air brushed through the streets and autumn leaves painted the neighborhoods in shades of gold and red. They shared a modest home, a place filled with the comfort of routine. Evening meals, quiet conversations, and the companionship of their little dog, Delcy. Life was not without its stresses. Barney often worked long hours, and Betty's job brought her close to the struggles of others. But they carried those burdens together, in the way couples do when they find strength in one another. On the surface, there was nothing unusual about their lives. They enjoyed drives through the countryside, time spent with family, and moments of rest on their porch when the evenings grew cool. Yet, like many who gaze into the night sky, they both carried a quiet curiosity about the larger mysteries of existence. What lay beyond those distant stars? What stories unfolded in the spaces humanity had only just begun to reach? It was a curiosity they rarely spoke of, but it lingered, as steady as the stars themselves. In 1961, America was stepping into a new chapter of exploration. The space race had begun to capture imaginations, and news of satellites, rockets, and astronauts filled the headlines. The idea of traveling beyond Earth was no longer fantasy. It was unfolding in real time. To live in that era was to feel both the excitement of progress and the quiet awareness that the universe was far bigger and more mysterious than most had ever considered. Against this backdrop, Betty and Barney's story would emerge. It would begin with a simple drive home, a familiar journey on winding roads through the White Mountains. They could not have known, as they set out on that September night, that their names would become linked to one of the most enduring mysteries of the 20th century. For now, picture them not as figures of legend or controversy, but simply as two people who loved each other, returning home from a trip. Their dog nestled in the back seat, the late summer air cool against the windows. Their lives were like so many others, grounded in the ordinary, and that is precisely why what followed would leave such a lasting impression. The night itself seemed calm, almost inviting. The hills and forests of New Hampshire lay in quiet shadow, the moon casting a soft glow over stretches of road that twisted through trees and open clearings. There was no sense of urgency in their journey. It was the kind of drive that encouraged easy conversation, moments of silence, and the gentle rhythm of tires humming against pavement. For Betty and Barney, this was not just another road. It was a path toward home, toward the comfort of familiar surroundings after days away. Yet, as the stars shone above and the night wrapped itself around them, something beyond the ordinary was waiting. The story of what would unfold has been told in many ways, as an account of mystery, as a subject of debate, as a cornerstone of modern folklore. But here, it can be allowed to breathe in its own time, like a long exhale at the end of the day. This is not a tale of fright, but of wonder, of two people who looked up at the sky and saw something that changed their lives. As you imagine this night, let your thoughts drift with theirs. A cool breeze moves through the pines. The stars are countless, scattered like diamonds across velvet. The headlights carve a gentle path along a road lined with shadows. In the quiet hum of the car's engine, in the steady rhythm of travel, there is a calm that makes the mind open to possibility. It is here, in this moment of stillness, that the story begins. A story of the ordinary touching the extraordinary, of lives interrupted by something that seemed to come from the sky itself. Whether you listen with curiosity, with wonder, or simply with a desire for calm, let the night take its shape around you. Let the voices of the past be carried forward gently, like whispers on the wind. For in the tale of Betty and Barney Hill, the night becomes more than a backdrop. It becomes a witness, holding within it a mystery that has lingered for more than half a century. And so, with the stars above and the road ahead, we step quietly into their journey, 1 mile at a time. The road curved gently through the quiet landscapes of New Hampshire, a ribbon of pavement weaving between mountains and forests. It was late on the night of September 19th, 1961. Summer had just given way to autumn, and the air carried a crispness that hinted at colder days ahead. The leaves, though not yet at their brightest colors, had begun to turn. Patches of red and orange glowing faintly under the pale wash of moonlight. Barney held the wheel with the steady focus of someone accustomed to long drives. His posture was upright, attentive, his eyes following the headlights as they cut through the darkness. He was a man who carried responsibility easily, someone who valued control and order. And even in the quiet of the night, he drove with care. Beside him, Betty sat with a gentler presence. She leaned slightly toward the window, watching the scenery slip past in shades of gray and silver. For her, the night was not just a passage to be endured, but a landscape to be noticed. Every curve of road, every shadow of tree seemed to hold its own story. Their little dog Delcy shifted in the back seat, circling once before settling into a curled ball. The rhythm of the car, the hum of the engine, the soft vibration of tires on asphalt created a cocoon of calm that pressed against the silence of the mountains. Now and then, the faint cry of an owl or the rustle of wind through branches drifted into their awareness, reminders that the world outside was still alive. Even at such an hour, the Hills were returning from a short vacation in Niagara Falls. In Montreal, a trip that had been both refreshing and tiring. They had explored, walked, taken photographs, and allowed themselves the kind of small escape that every working couple needs now and then. Yet the road home stretched longer than they expected, and though the night was late, they pressed onward, eager to return to Portsmouth before dawn. Driving at night through the White Mountains was its own experience. The landscape seemed to hold secrets, vast stretches of wilderness broken only by the occasional farmhouse or inn, their windows dark at this hour. The mountains rose like silent guardians, their ridges softened by moonlight, their slopes covered in endless forest. The stars above appeared brighter here than in the city, their presence sharpened by the absence of street lamps or human noise. It was the kind of night that invited reflection, when the world felt both immense and close, as though the sky had drawn down its curtain just for them. Conversation between Betty and Barney flowed easily at first. Comments about the trip, about the roads, about the quietness of the night. But as the hours wore on, their words became less frequent. A drowsy stillness settled in, the kind that comes when two people are comfortable enough in each other's company to let silence fill the space. Barney occasionally hummed a tune under his breath, while Betty let her thoughts wander, her eyes drifting between the road ahead and the constellations above. The White Mountains have long carried an aura of timelessness. Travelers crossing them at night often feel suspended between worlds, caught in the beauty of the natural serenity. The darkness can seem endless, broken only by the pale wash of moonlight or the fleeting glow of headlights. For Betty, who loved the sky and often noticed its details, the stars that night seemed unusually bright, scattered thickly across the heavens like frost on glass. As the car climbed gentle grades and dipped into valleys, the rhythm of travel became almost meditative. Each bend in the road revealed another stretch of quiet forest, another glimpse of shadowed ridges. The smell of pine drifted faintly through the car when Betty lowered her window, cool air brushing against her cheek. She pulled her sweater closer, comforted by the freshness of the breeze. The couple's sense of time began to blur in the long stretches of highway. The clock on the dashboard glowed faintly, but the numbers seemed less important than the steady forward motion. All that mattered was the road ahead, the familiar comfort of being together, and the promise of home waiting at the end of their journey. There is something about night driving that can make the ordinary seem extraordinary. A roadside sign, lit briefly in the beams of headlights, takes on a sudden significance. The curve of a mountain against the stars becomes a silhouette of quiet majesty. The reflective eyes of a deer or fox at the roadside glimmer like a hidden signal. In that suspended world, between the known and the unknown, the hills continued their passage. Though fatigue tugged at them both, they were not careless. Barney kept his attention fixed, knowing the roads could be unpredictable. Betty, sensing his focus, let her mind wander more freely. She thought about the vacation they had just enjoyed, about family back home, about the simple routines waiting to resume. She thought, too, about the vastness above them, the mysteries she often pondered when gazing at the night sky. As the miles passed, a sense of quiet expectancy seemed to grow, though neither could have explained why. It was simply the nature of such a night, when silence is deep, when stars are many, and when the road ahead seems to promise something just beyond the horizon. The White Mountains, in their solitude, gave the impression that anything was possible under their watch. Betty reached over at one point, resting her hand lightly on Barney's arm. It was a small gesture, one of comfort and companionship. He glanced at her briefly, smiled, and returned his eyes to the road. That was their rhythm, steady, unspoken, filled with the kind of ease that grows between people who trust one another. Completely the journey stretched on, measured not by destinations but by moments. The way the moonlight silvered the tops of trees, the occasional glimmer of water from a roadside stream, the deepening quiet as midnight settled fully across the land. For travelers like the Hills, the road was both a path and a pause, a place where time felt suspended, where the world outside seemed to hold its breath. They could not have known that within this ordinary drive, their lives would brush against something extraordinary. For now, there was only the hum of the engine, the steady curve of the road, and the endless stars above. The night cradled them gently, as though preparing them for what lay ahead. The white mountains, ancient and unmoving, stood as silent witnesses. The couple pressed on, unaware that the journey through those ridges would become more than just a passage home. It would become the threshold of a story that would echo far beyond their quiet drive, carrying their names into history. And yet, in that moment, they were only Betty and Barney, two travelers making their way through the night, guided by headlights, embraced by shadows, wrapped in the calm before the unknown. The car moved steadily along the mountain road, its headlights stretching out in twin beams that carved through the darkness. The world was quiet, the kind of deep quiet that only comes in remote places, far from towns, far from other travelers. It was in this stillness that Betty's gaze lifted once more to the sky. She had always been someone who noticed the heavens. Stars to her were not simply dots of light. They were companions in the night, each one suggesting the vastness of what lay beyond. On this night, the sky was especially clear. The Milky Way arched faintly above, a silver river flowing across the dark dome of space. The moon glowed softly, but not so brightly as to wash away the brilliance of the stars. As her eyes drifted across the horizon, one particular light caught her attention. At first glance, it seemed no different than a star or planet, perhaps brighter, perhaps a little more distinct, but nothing immediately unusual. She watched it idly, the way one watches a star on a long drive. Yet something about its presence tugged at her focus. "Barney," she said softly, not wanting to break the calm of the car, but feeling compelled to point it out. "Do you see that light up there?" Barney glanced briefly upward, careful to keep his attention on the road. He nodded. "Probably a planet," he said with casual certainty. He had always been practical, less inclined than Betty to indulge in speculation. Maybe Jupiter or a satellite. They've been putting more of those up lately. Betty didn't disagree, but she kept watching. The light did not behave as she expected. Instead of holding steady, it seemed to shift slightly against the backdrop of stars. A slow movement, almost like a wandering star. She narrowed her eyes, intrigued. "It seems to be moving," she murmured. Barney adjusted his grip on the wheel. "Stars don't move like that. Must be a plane." Perhaps it was, Betty thought. But planes had a rhythm to their motion, a path across the sky that made sense. This light seemed different. Its movement was subtle but irregular, not the straight, predictable line of a commercial flight. The car traveled on, winding through stretches of forest where the trees rose tall on either side, their branches forming shadowed arches overhead. In the clearings, Betty looked back to the sky. Each time, The light seemed a little different, sometimes brighter, sometimes shifted slightly in position, always refusing to settle into the ordinary. There was no fear in her observation, only curiosity. The night was to calm, the presence of Barney to steady, for unease to take root. Instead, she felt a kind of quiet wonder, as though the sky itself had chosen to offer them a private performance. Barney, though more skeptical, could not entirely dismiss what he saw. When the road straightened and offered him a clear view, he glanced at the light again. It was still there, shining more brightly than any star around it, with a sharpness that seemed out of place. Strange, he admitted. The word hung lightly. In the car, not heavy with worry, but touched with thought, Betty leaned closer to the window, resting her chin in her hand, eyes fixed on the light that seemed to follow them. The road carried them deeper into the white mountains. Streams of moonlight painted the ridges, and the night air pressed cool against the glass. Now and then, the forest opened to reveal wide stretches of sky, and each time the light greeted them anew. It no longer seemed like a stationary point, but something that shifted, as though responding to their motion. Betty's imagination began to wander, but gently, without urgency. Could it be a satellite? The newspapers had been filled with stories of space exploration, of rockets and orbiting machines. Yet this did not feel like a cold object drifting far above. It seemed closer, more present, almost aware. She thought of the stories she had read about unidentified flying objects, accounts that floated quietly in the background of modern culture. For many, they were dismissed as imagination or error. But Betty, with her thoughtful mind, kept the possibility tucked away as something worth wondering about. Barney, grounded in his practical nature, kept returning to simpler explanations. Planes, satellites, maybe even military exercises, he said in a steady voice. Yet, even as he spoke, he found himself glancing upward more often, tracking the light with a subtle frown of concentration. The car's progress slowed slightly, as though the rhythm of the drive had shifted with their attention. The miles ahead seemed longer now, not only because of the late hour, but because something new had entered their world, something unexplained, something quietly demanding notice. The light grew brighter, not suddenly, but gradually, like a lantern being lifted closer. Betty felt her pulse quicken, not with alarm, but with fascination. She nudged Barney gently. "Look again. It's bigger now, isn't it?" He sighed, a sound of acknowledgement rather than dismissal. "Yes, bigger." The road curved once more, and for a moment the trees swallowed the sky. When it opened again, the light seemed even closer, as though it had traveled with them, keeping pace above the darkened ridges. In the cocoon of the car, the world outside seemed both distant and intimate. The stars were far away, yet this light felt near. The night carried on with its quiet sounds, the whisper of wind, the occasional call of a night bird, but beneath it all was the steady, silent presence of the mysterious glow. Neither Betty nor Barney spoke for a time. They simply watched, their thoughts wandering, their curiosity deepening. It was a shared silence, filled not with unease, but with the quiet acknowledgement that they were witnessing something unusual. Betty, leaning forward slightly, whispered, almost to herself, "It's not like anything I've seen before." Barney did not answer right away. He simply kept driving, the road unfolding ahead of him, the light keeping its steady watch above. At last, he said quietly, "No, it isn't." The car rolled onward, carrying them deeper into the night, deeper into the unfolding mystery. The mountains around them seemed to draw closer, their slopes dark against the sky, as though the earth itself leaned in to listen. The light above, unwavering now, seemed to wait. The road unspooled before them in quiet curves, each bend revealing new stretches of shadow and silvered trees. The mysterious light in the sky, once just a curious point among the stars, now seemed to carry a presence of its own. It drifted, it lingered, and always it appeared to remain just ahead of them, as though leading the way. Barney kept his hands steady on the wheel, but his eyes lifted toward it more often now. His careful nature resisted quick conclusions, yet even he could not ignore the peculiarity. The light was not acting like a plane. It rose and dipped with an unhurried grace, not bound to a straight line. Sometimes it hovered, sometimes it drifted, side to side, like a curious watcher. Beside him, Betty leaned forward slightly, her gaze fixed on the glow. There was no fear in her eyes, only wonder. "It's almost as if it's following us," she said softly, her voice carrying the quiet awe of someone watching a rare natural event. Barney gave a low hum in response. He was not ready to agree, not ready to name it anything unusual. "Maybe we're just keeping pace with it," he said. "Sometimes it looks like stars move when you're driving." But even as he said it, he knew the explanation did not quite fit. The motion of this light was too deliberate, too distinct. The white mountains opened before them in occasional clearings, the sky widening above. Whenever the road straightened, the light grew clearer, brighter, closer. It gleamed against the dark canopy like a lantern suspended in the heavens. Betty reached into her bag and pulled out a pair of binoculars she had brought for sightseeing on their trip. She lifted them carefully, adjusting the focus as the car moved. Through the glass, the light sharpened into something more structured. It was not a star's sharp twinkle, nor the distant glow of a planet. She thought she could see a shape, though indistinct, brighter at the center, with a faint outline suggesting form. "Barney," she said quietly, still gazing through the lenses, "you should look at this." He glanced at her, then back to the road. A part of him resisted. He was practical, grounded. He did not want to be drawn into speculation. But her tone carried weight, not alarm, not fancy, but steady observation. At the next safe stretch, he eased the car slightly slower, careful with the wheel. Betty lowered the binoculars and passed them into his hands. "See for yourself." He lifted them, adjusting the focus, the car rolling forward with its steady hum. At first, all he saw was brightness. Then, gradually, details came into view. The light was not a single point, but a cluster of luminous shapes, arranged in a way that suggested order. He thought he could make out windows, or at least darker patches within the glow, as though it were not simply a light, but an object carrying lights upon it. He lowered the binoculars, his brow furrowing, his lips pressed in thought. "It's strange," he admitted. That was as far as he would go. The miles passed slowly, their attention fixed on the sky. Sometimes the object seemed to linger in one place, as though pausing to watch. Then it would move again, gliding ahead of them, dipping low behind ridges, before reappearing as they rounded bends. Betty's voice was calm, almost soothing, as she mused aloud. It's not like any plane I've ever seen. Not the way it moves, not the way it glows. Barney said nothing for a time. He kept his focus on the road, but his jaw was tight, his eyes often darting upward. At last, he exhaled slowly, as if releasing a thought he had tried to hold back. It feels like it knows we're here. The words settled into the cars. Quiet, not frightening, but undeniable. The road descended into a valley. The forest pressing close, branches swaying gently in the night air. When the trees thinned, they could see the object once more. Now it seemed lower, nearer, as though keeping closer company with their journey. The headlights illuminated signs by the roadside markers for small towns, distances to familiar places, but neither Betty nor Barney paid them much mind. Focus had shifted entirely to the silent companion above. Betty returned to the binoculars, drawn to the strange clarity of the light. She thought she saw a shape like a disc, tilted slightly, with a row of bright windows curving along its side. She whispered her impressions to Barney, who listened but kept his own counsel, his practical mind searching for explanations, even as the evidence before him unsettled those efforts. The car slowed again as Barney navigated a curve. He pulled slightly to the shoulder at one point, allowing the vehicle to idle while they both gazed upward. The night air pressed cool against the glass, and the forest around them was hushed, as though even nature paused to watch. For long moments, they simply sat there, two travelers in the stillness, their eyes lifted to a mystery hanging in the sky. Delcy, their dog, shifted restlessly in the back seat, giving a soft whine. Betty reached back to soothe her, her hand moving gently over the small form. "It's all right," she murmured, though whether she spoke to the dog or herself, she could not have said. When Barney resumed driving, it was with a new weight in his posture. He was calm, but there was a tension beneath it, the kind of focus that comes when one realizes they are part of something unusual, something not easily explained away. The road stretched onward, winding through forest and clearing, mountain and hollow. The object remained with them, sometimes nearer, sometimes farther, but never gone. Its glow was steady, unblinking, as though it were fixed upon them with quiet intent. Time itself seemed to loosen. Minutes passed slowly, each one drawn out by the silence and the steady companionship of the strange light. The dashboard clock ticked on, but neither Betty nor Barney spoke of the hour. They were absorbed entirely in the unfolding mystery above. Last, as the road curved once more toward an open stretch, the object descended lower than before. It moved across their path, settling into a position that seemed almost deliberate, as if to say, "Look more closely now." Barney drew in a breath, his hands tightening on the wheel. Betty's eyes widened, though her voice, when she spoke, was soft. "It wants us to see." The night, vast and still, held them in its embrace. The road, the car, the mountains, all of it felt smaller now, dwarfed by the silent presence above. And so they followed, not by choice or command, but by the steady pull of curiosity and wonder. The road dipped gently between shadowed ridges, the headlights tracing pale arcs across the asphalt. By now, the strange light had become more than a curiosity. It had taken on a presence, following, waiting, drifting near, and then drawing back again, always remaining with them. Barney's hands were firm on the wheel, but his posture had changed. His shoulders were taut, his jaw set in concentration. Betty sat forward in her seat, her eyes fixed upward. They spoke little now. Words seemed unnecessary, even intrusive, against the silent companionship of the object above. As they passed through another clearing, the light shifted once more. This time it descended lower, gliding with deliberate ease. It no longer appeared far away, no longer just a point in the sky. It had substance now, and it hovered over the tree line in quiet defiance of all that Barney knew about flight. He slowed. The car, the engine dropping into a low hum, the tires crunched faintly against the roadside gravel as he eased onto the shoulder. The night pressed in with a new kind of stillness. The forest hushed, the air cool and clear. Betty's breath caught softly in her throat. "Barney, look at it." Above them, the object hung silently, brighter than before. It was no longer simply a light, but a craft, structured and real. Against the dark sky, its outline took form, broad, disc-like, tilted slightly, its underside glowing with a pale, steady illumination. Along its edge were windows, or what appeared to be windows, glowing faintly like the lit portholes of a ship at sea. Barney reached for the binoculars once more. His hands were steady, though inside he felt the weight of the moment. Raising them to his eyes, he adjusted the focus carefully. Through the lenses, the object sharpened into startling clarity. He could see details now: the curve of its body, smooth and metallic, the row of illuminated openings along its rim. Behind those windows, he thought. No, he was certain. He saw movement. Figures, indistinct yet undeniable, passed across the glow. Silhouettes framed in light. Barney lowered the binoculars for a moment, pressing his lips together. He looked at Betty, who watched him with wide, searching eyes. "What do you see?" she asked, her voice calm but taut with anticipation. He raised the lenses again, his breath steady but deep. The figures were still there, humanoid, upright, moving with slow deliberation. He thought he saw one turn, as if gazing directly toward him. A ripple passed through him, not fear exactly, but a profound awareness, the sense of being seen in return. He lowered the binoculars again, this time more quickly. He set them in his lap, his hands resting firmly on them, as though anchoring himself. "There, watching us," he said quietly. The words lingered in the car, carried on the hush of the night. Betty turned her gaze upward again, her face illuminated faintly by the glow above. Her heart quickened, but her voice remained soft, steady. "It's extraordinary." The dog, Delcy, gave a faint whine from the back seat, shifting. Uneasily, Betty reached back to soothe her, fingers brushing over her fur. The gesture grounded her, even as her mind spun with the wonder of what they were seeing. Barney sat motionless for a moment, his thoughts caught between disbelief and undeniable observation. He was a man of practicality, someone who sought reason and evidence, yet here was something that defied both, presenting itself plainly against the night sky. The object hovered, silent, almost patient. Its lights glowed steadily, not flashing like an airplane, not wavering like a lantern. The figures within moved calmly, as though their presence were the most natural thing in the world. Barney lifted the binoculars one last time, compelled by both awe and duty to see as clearly as he could. He adjusted the focus once more, and what he saw deepened his conviction. The figures, perhaps a half-dozen or more, stood at the windows, their forms silhouetted against the glow. One, taller than the rest, seemed fixed in place, facing outward, its stance deliberate, almost authoritative. Barney felt the weight of that gaze, though no detail of eyes or features was visible. It was a presence more than an image, a sense of attention directed upon him, upon them. Lowering the binoculars, he exhaled slowly. His voice, when it came, was low, even, but marked with a quiet gravity. This isn't a plane. This isn't anything we know. The silence of the mountains stretched around them, vast and unbroken. The only sounds were the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze, the hum of the idling car, and the quiet rhythm of their breathing. Betty reached for his hand, her touch warm and steady. "Whatever it is," she said softly, "we're meant to see it." The words carried no fear, only acceptance. For a time, they simply sat together, looking upward, witnesses to something beyond ordinary explanation. The road lay empty around them, no other travelers, no interruption, just the two of them, their dog, and the silent craft hovering above the trees. The glow reflected faintly on the car's hood, casting it in a silvery sheen. Shadows from the trees danced softly along the roadside. The night had become a stage, and they were its only audience. At last, Barney eased the car back into motion. Slowly, carefully, he pulled away from the shoulder, the tires crunching over gravel before finding smooth pavement again. The object remained, gliding alongside their path, as if accompanying them. Betty kept her gaze fixed upward, her expression calm, her mind alight with wonder. Barney drove with a steady hand. His thoughts raced with quiet intensity. The experience was not one they could explain, but neither could they turn away. The night held them in its embrace, the road carrying them onward, the craft moving silently in tandem. It was as though the ordinary world had tilted, and for these moments they had slipped into a different kind of reality, one in which the sky itself reached down to meet them, and so the hills continued on, accompanied by a presence both mysterious and serene, their journey forever marked by the encounter. Near the road unspooled ahead of them, its surface silvered by the beams of their headlights. For a time, neither spoke. The silence in the car was not heavy, but contemplative, as though words might shatter the fragile stillness that now seemed to bind the world around them. The craft had moved with them, hovering at intervals, gliding with slow precision. At moments, it drifted close, its lights washing across the trees. At other times, it pulled back, retreating into the broader canopy of stars. Always, though, it remained present, as though tethered to their journey. Betty leaned her head slightly toward the window, watching the play of light through the glass. Her mind was filled with images she could not place into order: the windows of the craft, the silhouettes within, the silent majesty of the thing above them. Her thoughts turned in quiet circles, unable to settle. Barney kept his eyes on the road, his grip steady, but more deliberate now. He drove carefully, almost cautiously, as though some deeper instinct told him that the night had shifted into unfamiliar territory. The air felt different, not colder, not warmer, but charged with something he could not name. Time itself seemed to soften. The minutes passed without weight, without the usual markers that gave them shape. They moved forward, and yet the sense of distance, of progression, slipped through their grasp. Betty glanced at the dashboard clock, though she did not dwell on it. The numbers registered in her mind, but carried little meaning. She felt as though they had entered a kind of dream state, the ordinary cadence of a late-night drive replaced by something fluid and uncertain. Delcy, the dog, had curled into a quiet stillness in the back seat. Occasionally she shifted, letting out a low sound somewhere between a sigh and a whine. But for the most part she was calm, lulled perhaps by the rhythm of the car and the unusual hush of the night. The forest rolled past on either side, dark, trees rising and falling in soft waves, their forms outlined faintly against the glow of the sky. The moon cast a gentle light over the ridges, and the stars glittered with patient brilliance. Yet even these familiar features of the landscape felt subtly altered, as though seen through a lens that smoothed their edges and rearranged their proportions. Betty tried to remember the last town they had passed, the last landmark, but her mind refused to produce the details. It was as though the road itself had stretched, lengthening into something immeasurable. Barney slowed as the highway curved, his eyes narrowing. Ahead he thought he saw something, a dim glow between the trees, low to the ground. For a moment it seemed the craft had descended again, waiting by the roadside. But then, just as quickly, the glow faded, leaving only darkness. He exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. He did not mention it to Betty, choosing instead to keep his focus on the winding road. She, too, had fallen into silence. Her thoughts turned inward. There were fragments, flashes of images, half-formed impressions, the sound of a beeping tone, soft but insistent, the sensation of a road curving more sharply than expected, the faint memory of tall shapes along the roadside, though whether trees or something else, it was impossible to tell. These impressions drifted through their minds like fragments of a dream upon waking, vivid in one instant, then gone the next. Neither could gather them into sequence. Neither could be sure where one ended and another began, and so they drove on, wrapped in a sense of both movement and suspension, as though the world around them had bent in such a way that time itself had loosened at one point. Betty turned toward Barney, her voice soft, almost distant. "How much longer, do you think?" Barney blinked, glancing at the clock again. The numbers startled him. More time had passed than he would have believed, yet the miles they had traveled did not seem to account for it. He hesitated, then answered gently, "Not much longer now." The reassurance was simple, though it left him unsettled inside. As they descended a stretch of road bordered by tall pines, Betty closed her eyes briefly, leaning her head against the seat. She felt a weight in her thoughts, not heavy, but pulling, as though urging her toward rest. Behind her closed eyes, she glimpsed fleeting images, lights, patterns, indistinct forms. They were gone as quickly as they appeared, leaving behind only a residue of mystery. When she opened her eyes again, the road had changed. They were farther along, the trees different, the air somehow cooler. She could not recall the transition, the sequence that had brought them from one place to the next. It was as though a portion of the drive had simply dissolved. Barney seemed not to notice, or perhaps he, too, felt the same disjointed flow of time and chose not to question it aloud. His focus was on keeping the car steady, on reaching home, on holding to the one task that tethered him to certainty, and still the sense of being accompanied lingered. At moments, Betty thought she caught sight of the glow again, trailing through the treetops, pacing them just beyond clear view. At other times, the presence felt closer, as though it hovered directly above, unseen but profoundly near. The night deepened, and the road carried them onward, though both would later find it impossible to trace exactly how. By the time the familiar landmarks of Portsmouth began to emerge, a sense of relief mingled with confusion settled over them. They were nearing home, and yet the journey felt longer than it should have been. Stretched by unseen hands, the car rolled through quiet streets, past houses wrapped in slumber. The world seemed ordinary again, yet within them was a lingering disquiet, not of fear, but of unanswered questions. They parked at last, the engine fading into silence. For a moment they sat together, neither moving to open the doors. The night pressed gently around them, and the memory of the road, of the lights, of the strange pauses in time, hung in the air like a presence that had followed them home. Barney glanced at Betty, his eyes steady but clouded. "We're here," he said softly. She nodded, though her gaze lingered on the sky. "But something happened," she whispered, almost to herself. The words were not a question, they were a truth, though one they could not yet name. They stepped from the car, the cool night air brushing against their skin, and made their way toward the quiet of their house. Behind them, the road lay empty. Once more, its secrets folded back into the silence of the mountains, but within their hearts, the sense of mystery endured, the feeling of hours lost, of moments missing, of time itself reshaped by forces beyond their understanding. The small house in Portsmouth welcomed them with its familiar stillness. The porch light glowed faintly, casting a circle on the front steps. Around them, the neighborhood was quiet, the late hour ensuring that windows were dark, curtains drawn, and the world at rest. Barney turned off the car engine, and the silence deepened. For a long moment, neither moved. The drive had ended, but the journey still clung to them, as though part of the night had followed them home. Betty finally opened her door, the cool air carrying the faint scent of the sea. She stepped onto the gravel drive, stretching her legs, and breathed deeply. Delcy padded out after them, sniffing the air before settling back into the quiet of the yard. Inside, the house was familiar in every detail: the arrangement of furniture, the warmth of well-used rooms, the comfort of walls that had heard countless ordinary evenings. Yet, as they entered, something about it all felt strangely distant, as though they were visitors rather than returning residents. Barney set his belongings on the table and glanced at the clock. He frowned slightly. It was later than expected, much later. The drive from the mountains should have taken far less time. He tapped the clock gently, as though testing it, but the hands continued their silent march forward. Betty checked her wristwatch, then paused. The second hand was frozen, unmoving. She tapped the glass, adjusted the dial, but nothing stirred. The watch had stopped, inexplicably, as though time itself had been suspended within its case. "Mine too," Barney said quietly, holding up his own. Both had ceased at nearly the same point, their hands arrested in synchrony. They exchanged glances, puzzled but calm. It was a detail without explanation, yet not one that stirred alarm. More a curiosity, a strange fact among many others they had gathered on their drive home. Barney removed his shoes, setting them by the door. He noticed then that one was scuffed across the toe, the polish worn away as though scraped against a rough surface. He could not recall such a moment during their trip. He brushed at it absently, but the mark remained. Betty slipped off her coat and folded it over a chair. As she did, she felt a tug at the fabric of her dress. Looking down, she saw that a seam near the hem was torn, threads pulled as though by some unseen hand. She ran her fingers along the tier, frowning softly. The dress had been intact when they left. These were not dramatic discoveries. They were small, subtle, the kinds of details that might otherwise pass unnoticed. Yet, in the quiet of their home, under the weight of their evening, each took on significance. Together, they formed a pattern that whispered of something unusual, something beyond ordinary chance. Barney busied himself with small tasks, setting his belongings aside, straightening a chair, checking the lock's motions that anchored him in the familiar. Betty lingered in thought, her hand resting lightly on the torn fabric of her dress, her mind turning over the pieces of the night. When they finally sat together in the living room, the hour was deep. The silence of the house pressed around them, punctuated only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood. Betty leaned into the arm of the sofa, her voice soft. "It feels unfinished, as though part of the drive never happened." Barney nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the floor. "I can't remember stretches of it," he admitted. "We were there, and then suddenly we weren't. It doesn't make sense." They did not speak of fear. Instead, their words carried curiosity, puzzlement, the calm of two people trying to map an unfamiliar landscape of memory. Betty's thoughts returned to the object, to the windows, to the sense of being observed. The images were clear, yet disjointed, as though parts had been hidden from her. Barney, for his part, felt the lingering weight of those moments when he raised the binoculars, when he believed he had met the gaze of another. That memory held fast, though what followed dissolved into haze. As the hours slipped toward dawn, fatigue crept over them. Yet even in tiredness, sleep did not come easily. Their minds stirred with questions, circling, returning, reaching for something just beyond grasp. Eventually they agreed not to press the matter. The night had been strange, and their recollections incomplete. Perhaps, they reasoned, rest would clear the fog, and in the light of morning, clarity would emerge. They prepared for bed with quiet motions, each lost in thought. Betty folded her torn dress carefully, placing it aside. Delcy curled at the foot of the bed, her breathing steady. When at last they lay down, the stillness of the house wrapped around them like a blanket. Outside, the sky began its slow turn toward dawn. Stars fading one by one. Betty closed her eyes, images flickering behind them, the craft, the lights, the missing stretches of road. Her mind drifted, restless yet calm, until sleep finally gathered her. Barney lay awake longer, his thoughts lingering on the sense of time unaccounted for, on the quiet puzzles left in their wake. He turned on his side, watching the faint outline of the curtains against the first light of day, and let his breathing slow until, too, he surrendered to rest. The night had ended, but its mysteries remained, folded now into their home, waiting quietly in the shadows of their memory. The following nights unfolded quietly in their Portsmouth home. On the surface, life resumed its ordinary rhythm. Barney returned to his work, steady and practical, while Betty attended to the details of their household. To neighbors, friends, and colleagues, nothing seemed unusual. Yet inside the home, a current of mystery flowed beneath the familiar routines, shaping their thoughts in unspoken ways. It began with Betty's dreams. They came softly, without warning, arriving in the hours after midnight, when the house was hushed and the world seemed furthest away. At first, they were fragments, brief images that dissolved upon waking. A light in the sky, the outline of tall shapes, the sensation of walking, though she could not recall the path. But as nights passed, the dreams deepened. She found herself in unfamiliar surroundings, places that seemed both strange and strangely orderly. Narrow hallways stretched ahead of her, their walls curved, their surfaces smooth and gleaming, as though fashioned from something more than metal, something otherworldly. The air felt close, yet not oppressive, filled with a hum she could not hear, but somehow sensed within her body. Figures moved beside her in these dreams. They were not frightening nor hostile, but distinct, tall, slender beings, with large, luminous eyes that seemed to regard her with quiet intent. Their features were different from human faces, and yet there was something profoundly calm about their presence, as though their purpose was not harm but understanding. In these visions, Betty sometimes felt herself lying upon a narrow table, a brightness above her, like a soft, steady lamp. The figures moved with precision, their gestures gentle, as though conducting some careful examination. She felt no pain, only a strange detachment, as though her body were both hers and not hers, as though she were both participant and observer. At other times, she dreamt of being guided to a window. Beyond it stretched a vastness she could not place, dark, endless, punctuated with points of light that shimmered like stars. One of the beings gestured toward it, as though showing her a map or a chart of places far beyond her knowledge. The arrangement of those lights lingered in her mind, though their meaning remained just beyond her grasp. Upon waking, Betty would lie in the quiet bedroom, the dawn light filtering through the curtains, her thoughts suspended between dream and memory. These visions carried a weight unlike ordinary dreams. They felt rooted, insistent, refusing to fade with the morning sun. She shared them with Barney in soft, hesitant words over breakfast or in the stillness before sleep. He listened, his brow furrowed, his expression careful, practical by nature. Barney leaned toward reason, toward the possibility that these were dreams born of their strange experience, products of a mind seeking to fill the gaps. Yet even he could not ignore the intensity with which Betty spoke, the clarity with which she recalled each detail. Her voice carried not the haziness of dream, but the conviction of remembered experience. One night, Betty described walking through a forest path in her vision. The trees stretched tall above her, the night air cool against her skin. She recalled the sensation of being accompanied, guided, though she could not remember by whom. She remembered stepping from the woods into a clearing where light surrounded her, warm and steady. Another time, she recounted a moment in which one of the beings spoke to her, not with words, but with something deeper, a quiet transmission of thought. It was not language in the usual sense, but an impression, a meaning carried directly to her mind. She understood, without hearing, that she would not be harmed, that they wished only to study and to learn. Her tone, as she shared these moments, was calm, almost serene. There was no fear in her recounting, only a sense of wonder, of curiosity, stirred to life by these encounters within her dreams. Barney listened with quiet attention. At times he nodded, acknowledging her words, though he did not always respond. He carried his own impressions of the night, fragments of memory that troubled him, though he was less inclined to frame them as anything beyond mystery. Yet even he began to notice how vivid her dreams remained, how they seemed to grow richer with each passing night, layering detail upon detail until they formed a narrative of their own. For Betty, the dreams became not merely nighttime wanderings, but a kind of extension of her lived experience. She recorded them in her mind as carefully as one might record a journal entry. Their images stayed with her in the daylight hours, shaping her thoughts, influencing her reflections. Sometimes she would walk through the house and pause, her gaze distant, recalling the smooth walls of those curved hallways, the way light had glowed without source. Other times, she would find herself sketching absent-mindedly, tracing patterns of stars and shapes that seemed familiar from those dreamt windows. The days moved gently, the household functioning as it always had, yet the undercurrent of these experiences remained steady. Betty's dreams became a quiet companion, a nightly unfolding of mystery. In the calm of those weeks, she did not frame them as terrifying, nor did she rush to explain them away. She allowed them to exist as they were, vivid, insistent, curious. She shared them with Barney, not as declarations, but as offerings, fragments of a truth she could not yet name. And so, within the quiet walls of their Portsmouth home, a new layer of their journey revealed itself. The road through the mountains had ended, but its echoes stretched into the nights that followed, carrying with them visions of places beyond ordinary reach. Betty drifted into sleep each evening with a sense of expectation, not dread. She wondered what images might arrive, what memories might rise to the surface. She accepted them gently, holding them close, as though they were pieces of a puzzle left for her to assemble in time. Barney, though cautious, could not entirely dismiss them. In the quiet of the early mornings, he sometimes caught her gaze, distant and contemplative, and he felt the weight of her conviction. Though he did not always voice it, he, too, sensed that their story was not confined to the road in the mountains, that something larger had brushed against their lives. The dreams, persistent and vivid, marked the beginning of a deeper search for answers, a search that would soon lead them beyond their own home and into the company of others who sought to understand the mysteries of that September night. The autumn days drifted into winter, and the rhythms of life carried on around the hills. Yet beneath the ordinary routines of work, errands, and evenings at home, a quiet unease lingered. It was not fear, but a persistent curiosity, a sense of unfinished business that neither could set aside. Betty's dreams continued, steady and vivid, shaping her nights into journeys she could not dismiss. Each morning she awoke with new details impressed upon her mind, as if her subconscious had been storing pieces of a larger story and releasing them in careful sequence. Barney listened patiently, though he often reminded her that dreams could be the mind's way of working through puzzles and anxieties. Still, he could not deny the persistence of her recollections, nor the conviction with which she spoke. Together, they began to wonder whether someone might help them understand. At first, Betty turned to books. The Portsmouth Library offered volumes on astronomy, psychology, and the unexplained. She read quietly in the evenings, seated by the lamplight, her finger tracing lines across the page. She searched for accounts that might resemble their own. for glimpses of others who had encountered strange lights or unusual experiences. It was through these readings and through quiet conversations with friends she trusted that she first heard of organizations interested in studying unidentified flying objects. She learned of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, often shortened to NICA, a group of researchers, former military men, and scientists who sought to bring method and reason to the study of UFOs. One evening, after long discussion, she and Barney decided to write a letter. Betty drafted it carefully, her words steady but honest. She described the night in the White Mountains, the object they had seen, the strange behavior of the craft, and the missing hours they could not explain. She spoke, too, of her dreams, though she framed them as possibilities, impressions, that might relate to what they had experienced. When the letter was posted, they felt a quiet relief. Whatever might come of it, they had placed their story into hands that might listen without judgment. Weeks later, a reply arrived. Representatives of the group expressed interest, suggesting that the Hills' account was of significance. In time, investigators visited, speaking with the couple in their home. The meetings were calm, methodical. The investigators asked detailed questions, taking careful notes, sketching maps of the road through the mountains, marking where events might have occurred. Betty and Barney answered patiently, recounting what they could recall. They spoke of the light in the sky, the descent of the craft, the figures seen through the windows. They described the lost time, the stopped watches, the torn dress, the scuffed shoes. The investigators listened with measured attention, neither dismissive nor sensational, though grateful to be heard. The Hills sensed that these interviews, while valuable, could not reach the heart of their experience. So much remained locked away, buried in the blank spaces of their memory. It was around this time that Betty began to consider a different kind of help. She had read about hypnosis being used to recover forgotten experiences, to bring to light memories hidden beneath the surface of the mind. At first, Barney resisted the idea. Practical and cautious, he worried that hypnosis might create more confusion, that suggestion could shape false memories. Yet, as Betty's dreams persisted, and as their questions remained unanswered, he began to reconsider. They learned of a psychiatrist in Boston, Dr. Benjamin Simon, known for his work in treating trauma through hypnosis. His reputation was one of professionalism and care, not sensationalism. After much discussion, the Hills agreed that they would seek his guidance. The decision was not made lightly. To open one's mind in such a way to allow hidden memories to surface carried both risk and promise, yet they felt a gentle pull toward the possibility of clarity, of finally piecing together the lost hours of their journey in the quiet of their home. The decision settled over them like a calm resolve. They had taken their first steps by sharing their story with investigators. But now they would take another, one that reached inward rather than outward. Barney, still cautious, reminded Betty that whatever they might discover, they must remain steady, grounding themselves in the ordinary life they had built together. Betty agreed, her hand resting lightly on his. The mystery was theirs to face, but so was the life they cherished, the work, the companionship, the small routines that gave shape to their days. And so, with careful steps, they prepared to seek the help of Dr. Simon. The days leading to their first sessions were filled with quiet anticipation. Betty found herself watching the sky more often, her eyes drifting upward during walks, searching for familiar patterns of stars. Barney busied himself with work, steady as ever, though his thoughts often returned to the mountains, to the road, to the moment he had looked through binoculars and seen figures beyond human explanation. When the appointed day arrived, they traveled together to Boston, the city unfolding around them in all its bustle and movement. Yet even amidst the noise of streets and the press of crowds, they carried with them the stillness of their private mystery, the calm persistence of questions waiting for answers. They entered Dr. Simon's office, not with trepidation, but with quiet hope. Whatever might emerge from those sessions, they believed it would bring them closer to understanding the path they had begun on that September night now wound toward a new chapter, one not marked by the silence of the mountains, but by the voice of memory, ready at last to be heard. The office of Dr. Benjamin Simon was a place of stillness and order. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes on medicine and psychology. A soft carpet muted footsteps, and the light filtering through the tall windows carried a subdued glow. For Betty and Barney, stepping into this space felt like entering a refuge, a room set apart from the noise of the outside world. Dr. Simon greeted them warmly. His manner was steady, his voice calm and deliberate. He explained that hypnosis was not magic, nor a loss of control, but simply a means of helping the mind relax, allowing hidden memories to surface in their own time. Both Betty and Barney listened carefully. They had questions, of course, but above all, they felt reassured by his professional, measured approach. The sessions began with Barney. He reclined in a chair, his body sinking into comfort as Dr. Simon guided him gently into a state of deep relaxation. Slowly, carefully, Barney's breathing slowed, his voice softened, and the ordinary concerns of the day slipped away. At first, he spoke of the drive, the light in the sky, the descent of the craft. His words were halting, uncertain, yet gradually they took on a rhythm, as though memories long sealed were loosening their hold. He described the moment the road curved, the figures ahead, the way the car had stopped, though he had not touched the brakes. His voice trembled slightly as he recounted the approach of beings he had never before imagined. Yet even as his descriptions unfolded, Dr. Simon's calm presence kept the atmosphere steady, anchoring Barney in the safety of the room. Barney spoke of being led gently but firmly away from the car, of walking along a path not of his choosing. He described figures at his side, small, silent, with large eyes that seemed to see not just his face but his very thoughts. His words faltered, but then resumed, as though the memories were finding shape in the act of being spoken. He recalled being brought into a room where light seemed to come from no single source, where walls curved softly, unfamiliar, yet oddly seamless. He spoke of examinations, of instruments that touched but did not harm, of a sense of being observed with detached curiosity. Through it all, Dr. Simon's voice remained steady, reminding Barney that he was safe, that these were memories, not present dangers. Barney's breathing steadied, and though moments of tension arose, they passed like waves rolling toward a calm shore. Later sessions brought Betty's turn. She, too, reclined in the chair, her eyes closed, her hands resting loosely in her lap. As the trance deepened, her words came with surprising clarity. She described being led into the craft, the room filled with soft light, the presence of beings who communicated without sound. She spoke of one figure who seemed gentler, perhaps a leader, who reassured her with gestures as if to calm her. She described a long table, a seated position, the sensation of instruments that brushed against her skin. Her voice wavered but did not break. Dr. Simon guided her steadily through each moment, helping her remain anchored. One of her most striking recollections was of being shown a map, a star chart, displayed before her in glowing lines and points of light. The beings seemed to ask, without words, whether she understood. She had replied that she did not, yet the image remained etched in her memory, a web of stars, some connected by lines, as though roots had been drawn through space. As she recounted this, her voice grew calm, almost curious, as though she were not merely remembering but studying the memory anew. Across multiple sessions, pieces of the lost hours returned. Betty and Barney described parallel experiences, each consistent with the other, though recalled separately. They remembered being examined, questioned without words, then returned to their car. They spoke of the figures departing, of the craft rising into the night sky, leaving them once again on the lonely road through the White Mountains. When the sessions concluded, both expressed a sense of relief, though also a quiet solemnity. They had uncovered memories long buried, and though some details were strange beyond easy explanation, the act of remembering brought a measure of peace. Dr. Simon, cautious and professional, noted that while hypnosis could reveal suppressed experiences, it might also blend memory with imagination. He encouraged them to hold their recollections gently, without forcing certainty. Yet he did not dismiss what they had described. He simply offered the tools of reflection, leaving the ultimate meaning to them. For Betty and Barney, the sessions did not end their mystery, but they gave shape to the blank spaces that had haunted them. The fragments of memory became a narrative, one that explained the missing hours, the dreams, the unease in the quiet afterward. As they returned home together, they felt both lighter and more contemplative. The truth of what had happened remained extraordinary, yet it was now part of their story, spoken aloud, carried not only in dreams but in memory. The mountains still stood, the roads still curved through the forests, the stars still shone above the quiet fields of New Hampshire. But now, whenever Betty and Barney looked upward, they did so with new eyes, aware of the mystery they had touched, a mystery that would accompany them always in the days after the hypnosis sessions. Betty found her mind returning again and again to one particular detail, the image of the star map. Unlike fleeting moments or vague impressions, this memory had come to her with unusual clarity. It was as if a chart had been placed before her, suspended in the air, glowing softly in lines and points of light. The lines seemed purposeful, almost like roots, stretching from one point to another. Some were shorter, some longer, and a few formed a distinctive triangular pattern. She could not name the stars, nor locate them on any map she knew, yet the image lingered in her thoughts, like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Betty began sketching what she recalled. On plain sheets of paper at the kitchen table, she drew circles and lines, repeating the process until the memory felt captured in pencil strokes. The star map became more than just a fragment of her hypnotic sessions. It became a quiet focus. In her daily life, years later, as she shared her recollections, others grew curious. One woman, Marjorie Fish, an amateur astronomer, took particular interest. Patiently, she studied the map Betty had drawn, comparing it with known stars, searching for patterns. Marjorie worked with painstaking care, building three-dimensional models of star systems out of beads and strings, arranging them to see if any matched the layout Betty described. It was slow work, carried out over many evenings, yet eventually a possibility emerged. The pattern seemed to align with a group of stars known as Zeta Reticuli, a binary system some 13.9 light-years away. The idea was compelling. Could the map Betty had remembered under hypnosis have corresponded to a real configuration in the sky? The suggestion captured imaginations. For believers, it seemed a striking piece of evidence, a tangible connection between Betty's memories and the vast cosmos. For skeptics, it was more ambiguous, a case of interpretation shaped by expectation. Astronomical maps, after all, could be viewed from countless angles, and patterns were often in the eye of the beholder. Still, the story of the star map took on a quiet life of its own. It became one of the most distinctive elements of the Hills' account, not only that they had been taken, but that Betty had been shown something beyond Earth, a chart that hinted at journeys through the stars. For Betty, the memory carried a sense of wonder. She often reflected that the beings she described had not sought to frighten her with it, but to share, to offer a glimpse into their world. Whether one believed in the literal truth of her experience or saw it as something more symbolic, the star map remained a powerful image, a bridge between the small, familiar lives of a couple in New Hampshire and the infinite night sky above them. When she stepped outside on clear evenings, Betty sometimes lifted her gaze to the heavens, letting her eyes wander among the constellations. She did not pretend to know which of the countless points of light matched the chart she had seen. Yet the memory gave the stars new meaning, as though they carried within them possibilities beyond imagining. Barney, for his part, was more reserved. He accepted Betty's recollections, yet remained cautious about interpretation. His concern was always for the reality of their shared lives, for their work, their community, and the need to balance extraordinary memories with ordinary responsibilities. Still, even he could not look at the stars without a trace of wonder, aware that somewhere among them lay the answer to questions too vast for easy resolution. The star map became a symbol, not only for the Hills, but for the wider world that came to know their story. To some, it was evidence; to others, an enigma; to many, it was simply a reminder of the mysteries that surround us, mysteries that stretch across the night sky, quietly inviting our curiosity. And so the map remained, a sketch drawn at a kitchen table, born of a memory from a night in the White Mountains, a reminder that sometimes the simplest lines and circles can hold the weight of the infinite. For a time after the hypnosis sessions, Betty and Barney continued to live quietly, sharing their story only with those closest to them. Their lives were still rooted in the rhythms of New Hampshire, their work, their community, their small routines that carried them from day to day. Yet, little by little, their extraordinary experience began to reach beyond their circle. At first, the story traveled through quiet conversations. Friends spoke of what the Hills had endured, and curiosity grew. Soon, small local articles began to appear, hinting at strange events on a lonely road in the White Mountains. With each telling, details sparked questions, and questions led to more interest. In 1966, 5 years after that September night, a book was published that brought their story into wide public view, written by John G. Fuller and titled The Interrupted Journey. It carefully recounted the Hills' experience, including transcripts of their hypnosis sessions with Dr. Simon. TheBooks.com detailed approach invited readers to sit with the mystery, weighing the evidence as they would a delicate balance. For many, it was their first encounter with the idea of alien abduction, a concept that had been almost unheard of before. The Hills' story was not one of fantasy or spectacle, but of two ordinary people who had experienced something extraordinary. Fuller presented their lives with respect, their recollections with care, and readers responded. The book reached far beyond New England. It found its way into homes across America, then into libraries, and from there into conversations. People discussed it late at night, under starlit skies, wondering if such things might truly be possible. With publicity came scrutiny. Skeptics examined the account closely, suggesting psychological explanations, misinterpretations, or the blending of dream and memory. Others raised questions about the role of hypnosis, about suggestion and imagination. Yet even those who doubted often admitted that Betty and Barney themselves seemed sincere. Their lives not those of hoaxers, but of people deeply affected by an experience they could not dismiss. Interviews followed. The Hills appeared on radio programs and spoke with journalists. Each time they tried to present their story with honesty and dignity. Barney, more cautious, often emphasized his uncertainties, his wish not to sensationalize. Betty, more open, shared her memories with quiet conviction, though always with the awareness that many would not believe her. The attention was not always easy. They were thrust into the role of pioneers in a subject few had ever discussed. Some neighbors looked on with curiosity, some with skepticism, others with support. Through it all, the Hills remained grounded, continuing their work, their community service, and their ordinary lives, even as their names became known across the country. Television soon took notice. Documentaries and talk shows invited them to appear, their calm voices carrying their story to audiences who might never have picked up a book. Viewers watched, some with fascination, others with doubt, yet always with the quiet realization that here were two people whose lives had been changed by something unexplained. For Betty and Barney, the journey into public life was mixed with both pride and strain. They believed their story mattered, that it might help others who had experienced strange events of their own. Yet they also carried the weight of scrutiny, the need to live each day with dignity in the face of disbelief. As the years passed, the Hills account became a reference point in conversations about UFOs and alien life. Before their experience, the idea of abduction had been almost unknown. Afterward, it became part of the language of the unknown, a story retold in countless variations, and always at the center of it were Betty and Barney, not seeking fame, not desiring spectacle, but simply telling the truth as they knew it. Their voices, calm and steady, carried across interviews and books, reminding listeners that behind the mystery were two ordinary people whose quiet lives had been touched by the extraordinary. When they walked once more beneath the New Hampshire skies, They remained aware that the stars above them carried meanings few could imagine. Yet in their hearts, they were still who they had always been, a couple traveling life's road together. Their story now woven into the larger tapestry of human wonder. When Betty and Barney Hill first returned home from their drive-through the White Mountains in 1961, they could not have imagined how their story would echo outward. What began as a private mystery between two people became, in time, a landmark, the first well-known account of alien abduction, a story that would shape decades of imagination, debate, and cultural expression. Before their account came to light, reports of unidentified flying objects had surfaced from time to time. People spoke of strange lights in the sky, unusual movements, and mysterious aircraft. Yet the idea of ordinary men and women being taken aboard a craft, examined, and then returned was almost unheard of. The Hills' experience gave shape to a new narrative, one that would be repeated in countless forms afterward. The impact was subtle at first. Local circles discussed it, readers encountered it in the interrupted journey, and radio listeners heard Betty and Barney tell their story in measured tones. But as the years passed, their experience began to weave into the collective imagination. Soon, when others reported encounters of their own, they often used the Hills story as a point of reference, consciously or not. Writers, filmmakers, and researchers found inspiration in the details. The image of a lonely road at night, the sudden appearance of lights in the sky, the quiet figures with large, dark eyes. These became motifs that resonated deeply, echoing through books, films, and television. Each retelling in culture carried some trace of the Hills account. Reshaped but recognizable. For believers, the Hills story was a touchstone. It offered a model of how such experiences might unfold, lending a framework to memories and feelings that others struggled to articulate. Support groups for those who believed they had undergone similar events often traced their origins back to the Hills, seeing in them a validation that they were not alone. For skeptics, the story became a case study, examined and debated with intensity. Psychologists explored the possibilities of suggestion, false memory, and the blending of dream with reality. Historians of culture noted how the account fit within a larger moment in the 1960s, when space exploration was capturing the world's imagination and science fiction was flourishing in popular media. In this way, the Hills story became more than just their own. It became a mirror, reflecting the hopes, fears, and questions of an era. The early 1960s were a time of transformation. The space race, the Cold War, the expansion of science and technology, and the growing curiosity about humanity's place in the universe. Against this backdrop, the idea that two ordinary people from New Hampshire might have touched something beyond Earth felt both startling and strangely fitting. Television soon brought their story to an even wider audience. In 1975, a made-for-TV movie titled The UFO Incident dramatized their experience, with actors portraying Betty and Barney in quiet, serious tones. The film, broadcast into homes across America, gave viewers a chance to imagine themselves in the Hills' place, to picture what it might be like to drive along a lonely highway, to see lights descend from the sky, to face the unknown. The cultural impact spread far beyond entertainment. The Hills account influenced how people thought about extraterrestrial life. For centuries, the stars had inspired wonder and speculation, but the idea of contact had remained distant, abstract. Now, through Betty and Barney's voices, the possibility seemed immediate. Woven into the fabric of everyday life, artists painted their visions of the beings described. Authors wrote novels that echoed the themes of missing time, examinations, and memories retrieved under hypnosis. Researchers, both academic and amateur, gathered reports from around the world, looking for patterns. Each step traced back, in some way, to the quiet night drive of two people who never sought the spotlight. And yet, at the center of all this, the Hills remained remarkably grounded. They were not campaigners for fame. They did not demand belief. They simply continued to live their lives, carrying their story with them, sharing it when asked, and leaving others to draw their own conclusions. In this, perhaps, lay the greatest part of the cultural impact, the sincerity of two ordinary people, whose story was extraordinary precisely because it was told without embellishment. Over time, the Hills account came to be seen as the foundation of modern UFO abduction lore. Almost every story that followed, from whispered accounts in small towns to widely publicized cases, bore its imprint. The cultural archetype of the encounter, the missing hours, the beings with large, dark eyes, all found their roots in that September night in New Hampshire. Decades later, when people speak of alien abduction, they often speak through the language first shaped by Betty and Barney Hill, whether in belief or skepticism, whether in art or science. Their story has become part of the shared vocabulary of mystery. The stars above us remain vast, unchanged, and silent. Yet because of the Hills, they also carry new questions, new possibilities, and a reminder that even the quietest journey home can become a moment that reshapes the way humanity dreams. The story of Betty and Barney Hill does not end with absolute answers. Instead, it lingers in the spaces between certainty and mystery, between the known and the unknown. Their drive through the White Mountains, their lost time, their memories, under hypnosis, and the star map that remained etched in Betty's mind. All of these elements form a story that resists tidy conclusions. And perhaps that is why it continues to endure. For in every age, humanity has looked to the night sky and wondered. The stars above us have always invited questions. They shine across distances too vast to imagine, their light traveling for countless years before touching our eyes. To gaze upon them is to be reminded that we are small, yet also that we are part of something immeasurably great. The Hills' experience brought that vastness close, in ways that were both unsettling and awe-inspiring. Whether one sees their account as literal truth, as dream woven into memory, or as something symbolic of the hopes and fears of their time, it carries within it a simple truth, that we are seekers. We long to understand our place in the universe, to know whether we are alone, to reach beyond the boundaries of our daily lives. Betty and Barney never claimed to have all the answers. They only offered their story, spoken with sincerity, carried with dignity. In doing so, they became part of a larger human journey, the journey of wonder, of curiosity, of mystery. Tonight, as we reflect on their experience, perhaps we can imagine ourselves once more on that quiet highway. The road stretches ahead, lined with trees, the mountains rising gently in the distance. The car hums softly as it moves forward, headlights touching the curves of the pavement. Above, the stars shine with their steady light, each one a sun, each one a possibility. We do not know what lies among them. We do not know what mysteries await in the deep silence of space. But we do know what it is to wonder, what it is to dream, what it is to feel both small and connected beneath the endless sky. Betty and Barney's journey reminds us that sometimes the extraordinary enters the lives of the most ordinary among us, and when it does, it invites us not only to ask questions about the universe, but also to reflect on our own lives, our own paths, our own search for meaning. So as this story comes to a close, let it be less about answers and more about presence. The quiet presence of stars above, the steady rhythm of breath, the gentle awareness that mystery itself can be a source of comfort. For in mystery there is wonder, and in wonder there is peace. Now, let the night carry you into rest. Imagine the sky, wide and filled with light. Imagine the mountains, silent and enduring. Imagine the road stretching gently ahead, not demanding, not hurried, but simply waiting for your steps, your journey, your dreams. The stars shine as they always have. The night is calm, and you, too, may drift into calmness, into rest, into the soft embrace of sleep.